My name is Rachel. I'm 30 years old. I met my now husband Curtis through a mutual friend just 3 years ago. We got married 6 months ago. Curtis and I are the same age and enjoy camping, hiking, winter sports, and others. We hit it off right away. We enjoyed our dates because we shared the same hobbies, such as climbing mountains and skiing. I thought that even after we got married, we would be able to live ordinary, happy days as before. The reality was not so sweet. I got involved in some troublesome things by marrying Curtis. You can probably guess what that trouble is. It's my relationship with my mother-in-law. In my case, my adversary was not only my mother-in-law, but also my sister-in-law. My husband and I moved to a house near my parents-in-law's house after we got married. For some reason, my mother-in-law seems to think that I'm a woman of the worst kind who had tricked her precious son. Immediately after our marriage, she began to contact me frequently. She started making me come to their house on my way home from work and on my days off. I expected. We had just gotten married and I wanted to spend time with my husband's family as peacefully as possible. When my mother-in-law called me, I couldn't say no. I tried not to visit my mother-in-law's house unless I had something to do. However, when I went to my in-law's house, I was not made to feel welcome. On the contrary, my mother-in-law would make me do all kinds of housework and chores. My father-in-law just looked on and didn't say anything. He just smirks and laughs at me when my mother-in-law said something sarcastic to me. If he's not going to say anything for me, why don't he just shut up? It's a bit of a snide air. Right after we got married, my mother-in-law and father-in-law lived at home like this. Just 2 months ago, my sister-in-law, who was supposed to be married and living with her husband, came back to the family. I don't know the details because I didn't hear them directly. According to my husband's story, my sister-in-law borrowed money in her husband's name. Then she wasted the money into gambling. Her husband found out and asked her for a divorce. My sister-in-law was an extreme gambler and even stole money from my husband's wallet when she was single. It seems that she had always had a history of being sloppy with men. She said it was a miracle that she was able to get married. My husband felt that he could finally distance himself from her. My parents-in-law seems to love my sister-in-law. Objectively speaking, my sister-in-law was 100% to blame. Her parents were happy to accept my sister-in-law, who came back to their house. Not only that, they told my sister-in-law a lot of bad things about me. As a result, my sister-in-law joined in and started to bully me too. It's the dream team. There's my mother-in-law who calls me and forces me to do housework. My father-in-law, who had a snide attitude, and my sister-in-law, who was a foul-mouthed gambling maniac. I thought it would be too much for me after 6 months of marriage. One day, I was summoned back to my parents-in-law's house. My mother-in-law knew that I was off work today. "You're just lounging around at home anyway, aren't you? I will teach you how to be a proper wife, so come over to my house." That's what she said to me. I knew my sister-in-law was there, so I didn't want to go. "No, I had some things to do today," I told her. "Then come over when you are done with your errands, you understand?" Then, she hangs up the phone without even waiting for me to reply. I didn't want to speak ill of my beloved husband's family to him, but I couldn't endure it alone any longer. So I called my husband, who was working that day. "I'm at your parents' house because my mother-in-law called me. Could you come over after work?" My husband immediately responded, "Yes." I finished up at home and headed to my in-laws' house. When I arrived, the three of them were waiting for me. As usual, there is cleaning, laundry, and cooking to do. On this particular day, they spent an additional 2 hours explaining to me what a failure I am as a wife. You don't deserve to be with our son. You don't even have a pretty face. When are you going to divorce him? My mother-in-law said, and my sister-in-law added, That's so true. And they laughed together. My father-in-law didn't join in the conversation, but he was grinning and drinking in the background. When I listened without saying a word, You couldn't say anything because we told the truth. Well, that's right. You seem like a dull woman to look at. My sister-in-law snickered at that. My mother-in-law heard that too. Oh, Grace, you'd feel sorry if I told the truth, wouldn't you? And just when they were laughing their heads off, Hey, what was that? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law turned around in a panic to see my husband standing there. He looked so fierce that they could not imagine what he would do. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law went completely rigid. I was on my way. I knew you would be here soon, so I was excited to see you. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were laughing out loud because they were too excited to talk. They didn't notice the sound of my husband coming in the front door. What? Curtis! Since when? I've been listening to you since a while ago. I never thought my mother and sister would say such terrible things to Rachel. My husband said with a cold look in his eyes. When my sister-in-law and mother-in-law found out that my husband had heard the whole thing, their faces turned pale. No. Yes. It was just a little joke. They were desperately trying to make excuses. Their panic was more than I had imagined. I almost laughed a little myself, but my husband didn't take their excuses seriously. You have been hurting Rachel like this, haven't you? And for the record, Dad, you're just as guilty. I have truly failed you both. Don't ever contact me again except for weddings and funerals. Then my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who had been making a lot of excuses up to that point, freaked out and stopped talking. My father-in-law looked at my husband, and his mouth was agape. It's true that my husband doesn't usually get angry at all, and he's always kind to his family members. It was precisely because he was such a mild-mannered person that the whole family was so surprised. I was also overwhelmed by my husband's spirit at that time. My parents-in-law and sister-in-law were in a state where they could not say anything, so I felt relieved. Thanks to my husband, we are now semi-separated from my in-laws. I felt a little sorry for my husband, who had to distance himself from his family because of me. Thanks to him, my life became much less stressful and more fulfilling than before. One day, after about 3 months of such peaceful life, I received a call on my phone from my mother-in-law. My husband wasn't there, so I hung up while I was wondering if I should answer. But it rang again right away. This is the kind of call that keeps coming until I answer. I had no choice but to answer the phone. Yes, hello? Rachel, why didn't you answer on the first call? It's an emergency. My mother-in-law said in a high-pitched voice, interrupting me. Emergency? What do you mean? My mother-in-law shouted as loud as she could. Your father-in-law has collapsed. He's in the ambulance. What? My father-in-law? Yes, that's right. I'm going to the hospital. He said he might possibly have to have emergency surgery. I have to pay $2,100 first as a deposit for that, So Rachel, please lend me $2,100. What? I was surprised at the insane request to lend her $2,100. But what surprised me the most was the down payment. I mean, he hasn't even been diagnosed yet, and suddenly he has to go into surgery. And to pay that money in advance, there's no way that's possible. I thought it was crazy. So I went to my mother-in-law to ask her about it. Marjorie, please calm down. A deposit of $2,100 is absolutely ridiculous. I think you should do your research first. But my mother-in-law didn't listen to me at all. That's what they say. So we have no choice, right? If things continue as they are, your father-in-law might die. You are abandoning him, Rachel. She just yells hysterically. I don't know what to think. Obviously, my mother-in-law is lying. So I decided to do something about it. I launched an app to record the call. I understand you're in a lot of pain, mother-in-law. I'm also worried about you, so I'm heading to the hospital. At that moment, I felt my mother-in-law's words get choked up. What do you mean you're on the way? Anyway, I need the money. I ignore my mother-in-law. Then please call me when you get to the hospital. And can you tell me what the symptoms are? I will find out what kind of disease it is. Then my mother-in-law said, You are just a hospital receptionist. How can you possibly know? Just get me the money. She desperately asked me for money. I dealt her a crushing blow. What are you talking about, mother-in-law? I'm a doctor. What? Yes, I'm a doctor. I told you I was a doctor when I got married. My mother-in-law didn't seem to believe me at all. When my husband told them I work at a hospital, she's just a receptionist, right? She didn't believe me at all. I was told, you're just a receptionist, yet you're bragging that you work at a hospital. If I had been a doctor, I'm sure they would have said all kinds of things about me. So I didn't deny it strongly and let her say whatever she wanted. And this is a result. She's trying to rob me of $2,100 by pretending that my father-in-law is sick. Well, there's no way this plan would have worked in the normal course of events. Anyway, the safety of my father-in-law is my first priority right now. Please tell me his symptoms. Then I will call my hospital and let them know. If you tell the paramedics to bring him to my hospital, I will have the test done right away, and you don't need to pay any deposit. My mother-in-law finally believed that I was a doctor. She stopped saying anything. Can you hear me, Marjorie? Hello? Marjorie? Hello? With that, the phone rang off the hook. I knew it was a lie. I had a message from my husband that he was on his lunch break. I called him up and explained to him about my mother-in-law's performance and the content of the contrivance. My mother did that. My husband was so mad at her that he honestly thought she was crazy. So I'm thinking, I'd like to get back at them a little bit. I explained my revenge plan to him. Great! Go ahead, do it! And with his permission, I decided to give my mother-in-law and her family the best revenge present. Then, I called my in-laws who live relatively close to me. I got a call from my mother-in-law saying that my father-in-law had fallen ill. I can't head over there right away, so can you head over to your in-law's house for him? I told them so with an air of sincerity. And then, of course, everyone was like, Oh, really? Really? I will head over there now. I'm on my way. A few moments later, I got a message from my husband. They're all gathering at my parents' house because of Rachel's phone call. He said that Rachel's lies were confusing everyone, and they were starting to get angry. And that's when I found out what was going on. At about the same time, I got a call from my mother-in-law. "Rachel, come over to my house right now!" I went to my parents-in-law's house and found not only my mother-in-law, my father-in-law and my sister-in-law, as well as my in-laws who had not contacted. As soon as she saw me, "Hey, Rachel, what's going on? You can just tell everyone that your father fallen ill. It's so annoying," she yelled at me. My sister-in-law followed my mother-in-law's lead. "Yes, it's so rude to tell people that your father is fine." She glared at me like that. The other in-laws also seemed to be angry with me. One after another, they started saying bad things about me. Then my husband arrived. After making eye contact with me,
"Hey Rachel, what do you mean my dad's fine?"
he said that, and he did a great job of it. "I'm not lying. Your mother called me to tell me that your father had fallen ill. She asked me to lend her money because she needed $2,100 for a security deposit." I told them honestly. Then my mother-in-law and sister-in-law said, "How could you say that?" And they laughed like fools. My sister-in-law also insisted that there was no reason for my mother-in-law to do such a thing. To top it all off, my mother-in-law said, "I can't have a daughter-in-law who is a liar. I'm sorry, but I will make you divorce my son," she said with a triumphant look on her face. I stood up and said, "Can you say that after hearing this?" I started up the app that recorded my conversation with my mother-in-law and played it back. "I'm going to the hospital, and he might have to have emergency surgery. I have to pay a deposit of $2,100 for that. So Rachel, please lend me $2,100. As my mother-in-law's voice started playing on my phone, my mother-in-law turned blue. There was no way my in-laws could have misheard my mother-in-law's voice. My father-in-law's brother asked,
"Hey, what's this all about?"
asked my mother-in-law and her family in a low voice. "Well, this is..." the mother-in-law began to mumble. Then my husband, who had remained silent until then, spoke up.
"Guys, Rachel has been bullied by my mom and my sister for a long time. They didn't even believe that Rachel was a doctor, and they went to this ridiculous length. I just wanted to let you all know what these people are really like today, and that's what me and Rachel came up with. I'm sorry, I dragged you into this."
When he said that, everyone's anger immediately turned to my in-laws and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law looked like she was about to cry. "Oh, I really need the money. I'm in debt and I can't get my head around it." That's what she complained. But that doesn't mean this kind of fraud is allowed. My in-laws are saying, "Insulate us. Don't ever contact us again." With these words, they left my parents-in-law's house. Eventually, my husband said,
"I'm not going to have anything to do with you people ever again. You don't even have to invite us to your weddings or funerals. Goodbye."
With that, he left his parents' house. Since then, my husband and I have not answered even once when we are contacted by my in-laws. We have ignored all phone calls and emails. Rumor has it that my sister-in-law has been repeatedly in debt ever since she moved out. She finally lost her head. She finally had to file for bankruptcy. Because of all the commotion, her reputation in the neighborhood has taken a turn for the worst. They couldn't walk out of the house anymore, so the three of them moved somewhere together. Hearing this, my husband was unmoved.
I don't care where they go. They're nobody."
That's what he said. Now the 6 months has passed since then. The topic of my parents-in-law's house has come up less and less. Now, it's just in the back of my mind. Well, I don't think we'll ever have to deal with them again. We are now planning to buy our own house, which has been a long-held dream of mine. Until now, we've been thinking about my parents-in-law's house and their future. We have been thinking that our home would come a little later. But now that we are no longer tied to that kind of thing, we decided to take the plunge and buy a house right away. On our days off, my husband and I went to see open houses. Then we have lunch, and I discuss things with him. I'm the happiest I've ever been.